Good evening for those of you that just signed in. We'll just give a moment or two for everybody to get signed in. Okay, well, maybe in the interest of everybody's time, we'll get started. It's really a delight to have the chance to meet with all of you today. I'm Dr. Fabiano. I'm a psychologist. I work for the Center for Children and Families at Florida International University. I've worked with children with ADHD or related behavioral or attention challenges for almost the last 25 years. And a lot of the work has been done in schools. So I'm really excited to talk about positive behavioral supports in the classroom today. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Yes, my name is Dr. Rosalia Gallo. I'm a research associate professor, but it entails working with schools across our community and relating them to the projects that we have at the Center for Children and Families. Prior to working at the center, I worked for 30 years with Miami-Dade County Public Schools in special education programs, supervising programs for the district office.
So we have a true expert with us tonight in terms of how things work in schools and how children's behavior is supported in schools. We're going to spend just about 20 to 25 minutes or so talking about some specific strategies and techniques, and then there will be plenty of time at the end for any questions or answers. We'll also share with you some information about some of the ongoing work that we're doing in our center that you might be interested in learning more about. So tonight, we're going to be talking about how to support kids with ADHD. When we talk about ADHD, we're simply describing children that have developmentally inappropriate levels of either inattention or overactivity and impulsivity, or both of those things together. And importantly, when we talk about ADHD, those symptoms of inattention or hyperactivity or impulsivity, they cause problems in daily life functioning. So they get in the way of a child being able to be successful in the classroom setting, or perhaps on the recess playground, or if they're joining a sports team, or they're in a club, or they're at dance practice, and then also in the home setting with complying with morning or evening routines, getting homework done, getting along with siblings, minding parents when they ask them to do something. And because it's developmentally inappropriate levels of these things, they're happening quite often. All kids sometimes don't listen, and all kids sometimes break a rule or don't pay attention to what they're supposed to. When we talk about kids with ADHD, the sheer volume of these things are happening a lot more than we would expect given their age. And I'm going to start out, we're going to be talking about positive behavioral supports and interventions. And I think it's often helpful to put ourselves in the shoes of the kids we're trying to support, or the adolescents that we're trying to support, when we talk about these positive behavioral supports and interventions. And sometimes I think that these approaches get a bad rap. Sometimes parents or educators will say to me, yeah, I've tried that. Nothing works with this kid. And so before we move to the specific interventions, let's think about what it's like to be a child or adolescent with ADHD. Well, actually, let's back up a step. Let's think about what it's like to go to school and be a child without ADHD. Do you know how many times on average a child without ADHD is sent to the principal's office for discipline? If you were thinking in your mind, none, that's correct. The typical amount of times to get sent down for discipline is 0. How many times a child's been suspended from a bus or from the after-school program or from the playground setting because of behavior? It's none. The number of times a child has failed a class because they haven't turned in the homework that they spent all the time at home doing with their parents, that's 0, right? So what's so remarkable about typical education for students is how unremarkable it is. You go to school, you get your work done, you follow the rules, you get good grades, you pass that class, you get promoted to the next one, you keep doing that until you're all done. And that's what it's like for a typical child in school. So now let's put ourselves in the shoes of a child with ADHD, and let's not think about that child's whole school career. Let's think about just one morning in the life for this child with ADHD. And let's, just for the sake of the example, let's say it's a 3rd grader. And so it's the morning, the parent's alarm clock goes off, they go into the child's room, knock on the door, and maybe they were thinking, I'm going to start today on a good foot. I'm really going to be positive this morning. And they say, rise and shine. Today's going to be a great day. It's time to get up and head to school. Once you're dressed, come down. I'll have a nice breakfast for you. And instead of reciprocating with that positive attitude that the parent is bringing to the room, the child pulls their covers up over their head and say, I'm not going to school. You can't make me. I hate school. And so that takes all the wind out of the parents' sails, right? And they just have to say, well, you're going to school, get ready. And they go off and maybe start doing their own thing, putting their own clothes on, brushing their teeth. Maybe there's a sibling that they're helping to get ready. And in a few minutes, they go back and that child's not getting ready for school. They're still in bed. And so now it's not rise and shine. It's going to be a great day. They're just grabbing the child by the ankles, covers and all, and pulling them out of bed and saying, come on, get dressed. It's time to get ready. And maybe that child starts to get dressed, but then gets distracted by some toy that they were playing with the night before in the corner. And when the parent comes back, the child only has a sock on and maybe a shirt. Now the parent, if they were the old cartoons, they would be the thermometer with the red mercury rising. They're starting to get upset because this is a third grader who should be doing these things without any guidance. And the parent's having to give lots of guidance, right? And so they're saying, get ready, get dressed, you're going to miss the bus. And it doesn't end there. After many more prompts and many more redirections, the child finally gets dressed, heads down to the breakfast table. And maybe the little sister's already ready and started on her breakfast. And she's looking at a book or a magazine, and the child impulsively goes to grab it and spills the orange juice the sister is drinking all over her, all over the table, all over all the mail that was on the table from the night before. And now the parent's really upset because she's got to get this child dressed all over again because they can't wear these wet clothes to school. And they yell at the child for not just sitting down and eating their breakfast. And they say, get eating this breakfast. You're going to miss the bus. Let's go. And it doesn't end here, right? They head out towards the door, and the parent says, grab your backpack. It's, where's your backpack? It's always supposed to go right next to the door. Why isn't it where we left it the night before? And now with a furious search all over the house, they have to try to find it somewhere that it shouldn't even typically be, but they find it. And now the parent is hustling, speed walking down to the corner for the bus stop. And it doesn't end there, right? Instead of pumping the kid up for the day, saying, you know, come on, today's going to be a good day. I know you had a good day yesterday. Let's build upon that. They're pre-correcting the child, saying, when we get to that bus stop, you better stand still right next to me. You really are irritating the other parents because you're swinging around that backpack and it's knocking into them and their kids. And they get there, and wouldn't you know it, the first thing the kid does is start swinging around that backpack, and it knocks into a kid. And the other parents don't correct the kid or say anything about it. They do something quite worse. They kind of just shepherd their kids over to the far part of that corner and stand off to themselves, leaving that child and the parent standing by all alone and isolated on that corner. And it doesn't end there, right? The child gets on the bus. They made it. That's great. And the bus driver says, good morning, Tabitha. Good morning, Kyle. You're sitting right behind me. You better sit in this seat right here. I don't want you jumping around from seat to seat like you were doing yesterday. That's dangerous. And that's not where third graders sit, right? That's where kindergarteners or pre-kindergarten students sit. And so that child's sitting there and the other kids are calling him a baby or throwing little pieces of paper at him or teasing and doing that sort of thing. And it doesn't end there. When the child's bus pulls up to school and the child's getting off the bus aide saying, good morning, Michaela, good morning, Keisha, you better not run. The child hasn't even had a chance to step on school grounds, and he's already getting corrected for something he might do. And then it doesn't end there, right? He finally makes it to the classroom, and maybe he makes a beeline to the back of the room to check on the class turtle and see how the turtle is doing that morning, while all the other children are sitting down and starting their morning work. And so the first thing the teacher says to that child is, you better get in your seat and get working. This isn't going to be another day where you're falling behind. It's not even an hour in this child's day. And we could honestly say that he's probably gotten more commands, demands, reprimands, corrective feedback than all the other students in his class have gotten, not just that morning and not just that day, but in their whole school career. Now imagine that we extrapolate that out to the whole day, the after-school program, the scout group he goes to that night, his parents trying to get him to go to bed. It's no wonder when we try a positive behavioral support and intervention, it doesn't work the first hour or two that we use it. We have to unwind and undo all that damage that's really been done to this child over all these different settings and all these different situations if we're really going to make a big difference. So when I'm talking about these things today, you're probably going to say to yourself, yeah, oh yeah, I know that. What is this guy talking about? This is all obvious. Well, it is obvious. That's not the hard part of positive behavioral supports and interventions. The hard part is doing them day in and day out consistently, in spite of some of the challenges that you might be grappling with, to really help move the needle and make this child feel like you're in his corner or her corner and that you're there to support what's going on. And why do we need to do this? Well, if we look at the academic outcomes for students with ADHD, the results are very sobering. We know that kids with ADHD are more likely to be held back. They're more likely to require special education placement or special services. Their grades are lower. As they grow up and get into high school, they're more likely to drop out of school. When we think about what schools are typically doing to deal with behavior problems in schools, they're highly punitive. We're at the point where you can go on the internet or read a newspaper, and a few days a week, you'll see an article about a child in school getting arrested or getting expelled or getting suspended for something. We're focusing on all the punitive aspects of once the horse is already out of the barn and the negative behavior happened, now we got to deal with it, instead of some of the more preventative or forward-looking positive behavioral supports that help steer the child in the right direction. And now we can help them soar with their strengths and congratulate them on the good things that they're doing. And part of, I think, the reason why this is the case is that we don't spend a lot of time helping support teachers and best practice for dealing with ADHD in their classroom. Some colleagues of mine and I did a survey back in 1999, and only about 12% of teachers thought that they had received sufficient training on ADHD. And even though it about doubled 20 years later, it's still less than a third of teachers saying that they feel comfortable and supported in how to best deal with a child who is exhibiting some challenging behaviors in their classroom. And then therefore, it's probably not surprising if we look at these long-term outcomes that all the things we've been doing so far have not resulted in the outcomes we want. If schools were Fortune 500 companies, and I'm not putting down educators or schools, they work extremely hard. They love the kids they work with. But if we just look at the outcomes and we focus on what happens to kids with ADHD as they go through schools, if we were the Fortune 500 company, we'd probably be out of business because we're not moving the needle enough to help the most vulnerable students make their way through in a positive direction. And I think that a little bit of that is because of an over-reliance on reactive approaches, like after the child has failed for long enough, they get special education supports or they get a 504 accommodation plan. Something I really like is a model that's being used more frequently in schools, a multi-tiered system of support, where the idea is that we're going to push in positive behavioral supports and interventions right to the general education setting at the moment those interventions are needed, so that we can maybe put out a small fire, which is easier to extinguish, as opposed to if you wait for that fire and don't do anything for it for a while, it becomes a big fire. That becomes a lot harder to manage and to extinguish the flames from that. And so what multi-tiered systems of support do is say, we're going to be monitoring how children are progressing. If we notice any concerns, we're going to deal with them right away, and then hopefully not have to put in more intensive interventions. But if we need to, it will be within this framework of already having a strong foundation of interventions in the gen ed classroom. Dr. Gallo, is there something you wanted to offer?
Yeah, I mean, the unique thing about MTSS is that it's not waiting for the child to fail. It's actually immediately working with the child and intervening at the classroom level. And like you said, Dr. Fabiano, if that doesn't work, certainly more interventions, more tailored intervention for the student. And if that doesn't even work, there's a possibility of, for example, a behavioral assessment, functional behavioral assessment, to kind of develop a behavioral intervention plan specifically for the student with targeted outcomes in short-term capacity. So for example, very specific to the child as to what he needs. So multi-tiered system of support seems to be an approach that's promising for sure.
when we think about multi-tiered systems of support, one of the maybe most neglected tiers is the first one, the universal tier, the things that the teacher's using to support the child, all children in the classroom. And I think this is really important to emphasize because some of the things we're going to talk about, I think people take for granted, but they are really the things that make a big difference in children being invested and engaged in their classroom. And if we don't have this really strong foundation on tier one of good practice, sometimes it doesn't make sense to meet and think about, well, what else are we going to do? Because if I get in a more intensive intervention, but I have a weak foundational base, I wouldn't expect that intervention to work very well. So the first thing we always check out when we talk with educators is to make sure, and this is what good educators do, right? They're empathic. They are active listeners. They pay attention to the students in their class. They know about their students. They know everything about them, the siblings they have, or the things that they like to do, or the activities they're involved in. And then just good teaching is an intervention in and of itself. If we're engaged in the lesson, there's not really a reason to be inattention or to get into mischief. And then on top of that, good classrooms have liberal use of praise and encouragement. We catch kids being good. Now, this is the opposite of the way society works, right? And if you don't believe me, go to any Little League game. If you go to a soccer Little League game, you won't hear any cheering at all until a goal is scored. And the rest of the time, it's telling kids what to do or where to go or how to be or what they did wrong. We need to flip that around in classrooms. We should catch kids that are paying attention, notice that, kids that are good cooperators or sharers, kids that are nice friends, that are polite and use manners, that are actively working in the classroom. All of those are things that we can notice. And we can provide rewards and celebrations for the kids that are doing the right thing. That moves the climate of the class towards positivity. If all of that is going on really well, then we can set clear limits, have rules that we remind the kids about. At times we can choose our battles and kind of ignore or redirect, and then only rarely have to use consequences like taking away a privilege or maybe discipline referral to the office. When I go to a classroom and a teacher says, yeah, I know you're here to see this student, it's May and he hasn't been to the recess all year, he's never earned it. That's this pyramid upside down, right? That there's no reason to try in that kind of classroom because you haven't experienced all this infusion of really good feeling and rewards and celebrations. Go ahead.
No, Dr. Fabiano, one of the big things is, in terms of praising, like you said, you're going to invert that triangle. Totally agree with you. It doesn't come naturally, and we should be doing it, and you're going to talk about it right now in this particular slide, but it doesn't come naturally. So we definitely have to train our teachers, obviously parents, and anybody that's working particularly with a child that has ADHD.
I'm glad you brought it up because the way society goes is we let sleeping dogs lie, right? If a child's behaving and doing what they're supposed to be doing, we don't say anything. They should be doing that anyway, right? But the second that child squirms in their seat or maybe stops working, we always comment on that. And if you just think about the way adult attention works, and it's a powerful tool, if we're always paying attention to the negative and never really paying attention to the positive, we would predict over time we'll see more negatives because kids like to get our attention. They might learn that they can get it that way instead of by doing the right thing. And when I work with educators and parents, and I'm guilty of this myself, and I ask, do you think you praise a lot? Are you praising at the recommended, 3-to-1 ratio of 3 compliments or praise statements for every command, demand, reprimand? Most people will say, oh, yes. In fact, I'm probably an overachiever. I'm probably like 5-to-1 or 10-to-1. But when we go into classrooms and we do observations, it turns out that the ratio is actually upside down, that there's usually more negatives, that would be the gold line that you're looking at here, relative to positives, the blue line. And in fact, in your whole school career, the best ratio you ever get is 2 negatives for every positive, and that's in kindergarten. And then for the rest of your life, it just gets worse. By 5th grade, it's a 4-to-1 ratio. We know in high school, it's going to be much broader. There's not a lot of praise in high school settings individually administered to kids. And we also know that gold bar, the commands and reprimands, children with ADHD are overrepresented there. So they probably don't have the 2-to-1 ratio or the 4-to-1 ratio that other children are enjoying. They're probably having many more commands and reprimands relative to the praise they're getting. So that's even more reason to think about catching them being good way more often. The thing about praise is it's free. It doesn't cost us a dime to say something nice or to notice a child who's succeeding, and it can make a big difference in how they feel about their future work in whatever role or situation that is that you're talking about.
I wanted to emphasize just
Yep.
the third bullet is we want to praise direction. Just any like I call them baby step towards the particular outcome or the particular goal that you see the child moving in that direction. That's what you want to praise. And every step that they take towards that goal, it's one more step that encompasses what the behavior needs to look like. So always think that way: praise direction, not perfection, because ultimately that's what's going to get you to get the child to appropriately demonstrate his performance behaviorally.
I like that. Praise direction, not perfection. That's a good rule of thumb. When we think about a typical child, probably the most common communication that they have with an adult during the day deals with a behavioral request. In fact, think about that. When you talk to your kids or you talk to a student, you're probably asking them sometimes how'd today go, or you might be asking them for their opinion on something. Rarely. More times than not, you're asking them to do something. Put this away, pick that up, get started, go move over here, now move over there. It turns out that there's types of requests that are highly unlikely to have the child follow through if you give them to them. And then there's behavioral requests that are highly likely to result in follow through. And the bad requests are ones that are things like take out your math book, turn to page 42, take out a piece of paper, put your name at the top, also put the date, and then get started on the odd number items. When you're done, put it in the blue bin in the back of the room. That's way too many steps for kids to be. Some of you might have already forgotten some of the steps in that long chain of events that you're required to do. More effective commands are going to be one step at a time for kids. And then as they get good at that, you might be able to chain another command or behavioral request after that. There are also vague commands, the ones that we grew up with as children. Behave, knock it off, shut it, stop, quit. Those mean something from the point of view of the adult, but for a child, they don't understand how to read between the lines and know what it is that you're really meaning for them to do. Question commands are a problem. Don't you think it's time to get started on your work? Is today the day you're going to decide to make a good choice in the lunchroom? Isn't it time to knock that off? What's wrong with that? Those suggest that there's an option. Well, no, today isn't the day I want to get started on my work. Maybe tomorrow, right? And so good commands are ones that are issued once you obtain the attention. They're one step at a time. They're specific, so they tell the child what to do instead of what not to do. A characteristic of bad requests is that they include the words no, don't, stop, or quit. There are an infinite number of things a child should not do. And if they stop doing one thing that they're not supposed to be doing, they might just move to another thing that they're not supposed to be doing. So if I had a child come into the room and they were not starting their work, I might say, don't go into the back of the room. Stop touching that. Quit goofing around over there. Don't do that. Stop. No, don't quit. A better instruction would be sit down at your desk and begin your math worksheet. I tell the child exactly what to do. I have a very high probability of follow through. I tell them what not to do. I have a very high probability of being frustrated as the adult because they might not do exactly what I want them to do. We can also choose our battles. So a lot of times kids will do minor things that are annoying to us. They might be fidgety or squirming. Sometimes we know kids with ADHD might hum to themselves or make little noises or things like that. They might stand at their desk when they're doing their work. If those are things that are not really bothering anybody else, a good strategy for the adult's point of view is to just decide not to attend to that for two reasons. One is you don't want to give attention to the behavior that's not so important when they're doing something that is important, like doing their work or following the lesson or cooperating with a peer. The other thing is that we don't want them to get all of our attention for the negative behavior and miss out on that attention for the positive behavior. And then as soon as they do what maybe you want them to do, like stop humming, instead of saying, stop making all that noise, the second they stop humming, you might say, I like the way you're working so quietly at your desk today. And then you comment on the thing that you want them to do. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here in being conscious of time. We're happy to share the slides with anybody that's on the call today. And there'll also be an opportunity. We'll send you a link to the recording. Those are all tier 1 strategies. So I know a classroom is healthy if I go into it and there's 3 praise statements for every command, demand, reprimand. If the teacher's choosing his or her battles, if there's clear expectations and rules and structure, there's predictable routines so that children learn what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. If all that's in place and it's working really well, and a child is still having some challenges, the next thing we might think about in a multi-tiered system of support is going to be tier 2 interventions. What do we do to level up or add on to this really strong foundation of positive behavioral supports? And I would argue for most kids with ADHD in school settings, a daily report card will be required. And it's maybe one of our strongest tools in the whole field that can support a kid with ADHD in schools. I mentioned just a little bit of a conflict of interest. I'm going to be talking about some things that come from some books that we've put out. Also have used it with my own child frequently, and even though now older, it's a little bit different in terms of driving curfew and those sorts of things, but it's been a really useful tool in our own family. A good example of a daily report card lists some targeted behaviors that the child is supposed to work on, and then keeps accounting of those behaviors throughout the day. This is a good example from an educator we worked with in the past. There are really 4 main ingredients of a good daily report card. And I think in Dr. Gallo's and my work, we often see cases where there may be 2 out of 4 ingredients present or 3 out of 4 ingredients present. But if it's really going to be a good, effective system, these are the 4 things science says need to be in the daily report card to make it effective. The first thing you have to have is specifically defined goals. So it can't be something like, I had a good day today, smiley face, or face with just a line and not a smile, or just a check mark or something like that. It has to be specific, like had 3 or fewer interruptions during the lesson, or completed work within the time given by the teacher. And that's important for a few reasons. One is that the child needs to know exactly what they're accountable for in terms of the goal. But it's also important for the adults so that they're making sure that they're calibrating their judgments, not based on something that happened at the end of the day or mixing things up from the day before. But for today, did the child meet this goal during this lesson or during this class period? The feedback on it needs to be immediate. So if that child has a goal of 3 or fewer interruptions during a lesson, I can't wait till after the lesson's over and say, hey, you had 10 today. You're not going to meet this goal for today. I have to tell them the first time they interrupt, I have to give them a symbol. Maybe we've arranged, I'm going to put a finger up with 1 or 2 or 3. Maybe I go over their desk and give a little pat every time that they interrupt, because they need to keep track of how they're doing so that they can modulate their behavior downward if they know they're getting close to not meeting their goal. The daily report card has to go to a caregiver each day. There has to be daily feedback on progress. It's not waiting till the end of the marking quarter or the end of the week. It's every day. And most importantly, there has to be something in it for the child. There have to be consequences, positive ones, that are present when the child meets the goals that have been laid out. So if that child has a daily report card and they meet 75% of their goals, or 3 out of 4 yeses are checked for their day, and that's a good day, that might be their ticket to being able to stay up a little bit later, maybe 15 minutes later past their bedtime, or access to a screen. And what the parent will tell the child the first thing in the morning is, right now you don't have any screen time at all today. You can earn 2 minutes of screen time for every yes that you earn on your daily report card, or you can earn an extra minute on your bedtime, or from now on, your bedtime is going to be a half an hour earlier, 7:30 instead of 8. If you want to stay up till 8 o'clock, you have to get 5 or 6 yeses in order to earn your way up to that bedtime that you want. And now the child's going to be motivated to meet these goals on this daily report card because it's tied to something that they really care about. And that transaction that they often make in a classroom of, boy, I really don't want to do this. This is hard for me. It's hard for me to pay attention. Now they have another point of view saying, yeah, but maybe I should because I really want to be able to earn that privilege later on today. I don't want to miss out on that. And that helps move them in a positive direction. And then hopefully experience those naturally occurring praise statements, smiles, attaboys or attagirls that happen once you start doing things the right way in your classroom at school. It is an evidence-based approach. I'm just going to kind of tie things up by telling you about a study we did through the Center for Children and Families, where we were working with students that had IEPs. They were in special education placements, and they also had ADHD. And we flipped a coin, and we randomly assigned them to get either special education as usual, or they got a daily report card that took the goals and objectives in their individualized education program, and they turned them into daily report card targets. So if they had a goal of reading on grade level at the end of the school year, we might have had a daily report card target that said completes reading assignment within the time given at 80% accuracy. And so one of the groups got all the services and supports and interventions they normally would, and one of the groups got all of those things plus this daily report card every day for the whole school year. And we had observers go into each of these students' classrooms in October at the beginning of the school year and May at the end of the school year. And we compared the rates of challenging behaviors that happened in these classrooms from October till May. If there were fewer challenging behaviors in May, that would suggest improvement. Well, in the group that got special education as usual, they're the blue bar, they didn't change at all. They had just as many disruptive behaviors in May as they did in October. Now, they didn't get any worse. I guess that's good, but they didn't get any better. Students that had this daily report card had 8 fewer rule violations on average in the 30-minute observation period. And you might say to me, big whoop. Well, I got to tell you why that does mean something. Let's round up. Let's say it's 10 in this half an hour period. So that's 20 fewer rule violations per hour. And there's 6 hours in a school day. So that's 120 fewer rule violations in a day. 5 days in a week. Now we're up to 600 fewer in a week. 4 weeks in a month. That's 2,400. And there's 10 months in the school year. It's 24,000. Imagine the different experience the child who had 24,000 fewer commands, demands, reprimands, and instances of corrective feedback had during the course of their school year relative to the one that was just plateauing and staying the same. And so when people tell me, yeah, these positive behavioral supports interventions are a lot of work, they don't work, I'm not sure if I want to do it. This would be an example I would point to say that this could actually be making a huge difference in the school year for a child who's exhibiting these challenging behaviors. And so in the interest of time, I just wanted to wrap up and tell you a little bit about something we're doing in our Center for Children and Families this summer. We're actually doing a study where we're comparing general education classroom settings, ones that are mainly focused on Tier 1, to more special education classroom settings, ones that embed Tier 1 plus Tier 2 and some Tier 3 approaches, more intensive positive behavioral supports and interventions. And we're actually embedding that in a larger study where we're looking at how those things work for children with ADHD and how if you combine it with medication, how that works. And also if you add in academic accommodations, things like extra time to complete assignments or low distraction workspaces, like putting headphones on and having a visual barrier around your desk so it's not as easy to get distracted by other kids that are around you. And we're going to be doing this in an 8-week summer school setting. During this 8-week study, we'll be able to look at the end of the summer, tell parents, well, did adding in the more intensive positive behavioral supports and interventions, did that move the needle relative to a general education setting? And did medication make a difference relative to a placebo capsule? And did any of these accommodations help your child get more work done or do better on quizzes that they were given in the classroom setting? And then in addition to that, we can also look at all the combinations of all these things. So we might be able to say, well, there wasn't an effective medication relative to placebo, but when we had the really intensive positive behavioral supports in place, any effective medication, there was no room for an effect because your child did so well with the positive behavioral supports, we didn't have to add in other treatments. And for many parents, that would be a nice outcome. Same thing with the academic accommodations. Some of them may not work just used alone, but if they're combined with another treatment, then maybe that will activate them and they'll be more effective for the child.
I just wanted
Yes, please
Sorry,
do.
I just wanted to mention, Dr. Fabiano, that the beauty of it is at the end of, obviously the summer, the 8 weeks during the summer, parents actually walk away with a very comprehensive report indicating what's best in terms of those, three conditions. It's
And great, I'm glad you said that. And it could be turnkey where they can walk right to their district and say, here's what worked. Can we please talk to and partner together to get these things in place for my child in the school year when it really counts?
correct.
We're going to be running this study both in Western New York and Buffalo and in Miami. There's a little QR code you can scan based on your respective site if you wanted to add your information and get more information from our team. You can also call our numbers directly and we'll be happy to chat with you. Dr. Gallo, anything else you wanted to say before we work together on
No,
Q&A?
I think we covered everything well.
Okay, so there's a couple questions in the Q&A that one of them is, could you have a copy of the multi-tiered support? So if you registered for this webinar, which you did because you're here, we do have your email and we can send out a copy of the link to the slide deck or the recording, and so you could watch it. Maybe Dr. Gal, you can handle this one.
Yeah, what schools in Miami offer this approach? Miami, all the schools have MTSS. And in fact, they have what is known as an RTI response to intervention team. So you definitely want to talk to your school and see who they are. In addition to that, if at any meeting related to a particular child, you have to participate, you have to be noticed, you have to be aware of that. I was gonna say they have Miami-Dade County Public Schools has an incredible manual on MTSS and what should be going on in each tier for both behavior, which is what we addressed today, but also academics. And it's available through dateschools.net.
And I would say both Dr. Gall and I work with lots of schools. Educators are terrific. They're in the field because they care about the kids in their classrooms. If there are some caregivers on the call today, I would encourage you to reach out and talk with the teacher. If you have any questions or concerns, they're almost always responsive. We haven't talked too much about older students like middle school or high school students, but if anybody on the call works with older students, these same principles still apply to them. Even though there's kind of a little bit of this myth that adolescents don't want adults to talk to them or say nice things to them, it's not true. Having worked with lots of adolescents, they like the adult attention the same as little kids like it. And there was an interesting study I read a little while ago that talked about, they asked adolescents, where do you feel like you most connect with the educators in your school? And the high school students never mentioned their class. You know, they talked about the hallway, walking into the school if one of the teachers acknowledged them and said good morning, when they were at a sports event at school or the class play and the teacher recognized them from the class and said hello. You might think that that's just a small gesture and it doesn't really carry much water, but from the student's point of view, that turned out to be, they would say later, that was one of the most important interactions they had with the educators their whole school year. So even these little tiny positive interactions stack up and they create the sorts of momentum that result in better school attendance and less dropout or more engagement in class or better behavior in the unsupervised areas within the high school. And so there are things
Fabiano,
that we can all
have
do.
A question related to preschool age and daily report cards. So,
oh, great. So for little kids, so preschool daily report cards are a little more challenging at the preschool level because most of those students can't read. So what we often think of, sometimes what we'll do is we'll take a picture of the students sitting on the rug or maybe cooperating with their peers at the centers that they're going around to. And we show them an exemplar. This is what we're going to be working on is keeping our hands and feet to ourselves at the center and being a good friend. And you'll get 3 warnings about that. And then if you are a good friend, then there'll be some sort of special privilege or a consequence that you would like probably right after the center. Because the other thing we have to think about with preschool age kids is that their concept of time and future is not as well established as elementary school age kids. And so we would want to think about tying the reward directly to the behavior that they did that was well. And so sometimes even in preschool, we don't think about a daily report card. We think more about like when-thens. When you pick up the toys, then you can join us in line to head out to recess or something like that. So it's really clear cause and effect for the preschooler.
I'm not, where are you post the sign up sheet? I'm
I
not sure
think
what,
I think that one we can answer. If you registered for the webinar, you'll get the information.
Okay.
And then it looks like we have a question here about like takeaway special privileges.
correct, field trips.
Yeah, so yeah, I can't speak about any particular situation on a webinar like this. I don't know enough about you or the context or that sort of thing. But what I would mention is to go back to the pyramid that we showed earlier. And if most of the interactions are takeaways or missing out or punishments or scoldings or that sort of thing, that usually serves as a canary in the coal mine that tells us there's something wrong with what's going on with this system. Because I'm an optimist about kids. I've never met a kid in my whole career that showed up and said, I can't wait to do terrible in the thing you're going to ask me to do. They never do that. They always come in with a positive frame of mind and an attitude that is positive. It's usually the demands of the task or something that frustrates them that then causes things to go sideways. And so I would say that this would be a good, if you notice that your child's always seems to be in a failure loop, that's a good signal that maybe there's a need for a meeting with the educators at the school to try to figure out how you can turn that around.
Absolutely. And I would definitely start with a teacher, and then obviously administration.
And then there's a question for high school students. High school students are an under-addressed group. I think we have to do a better job as a whole field figuring out how we can grow our interventions with the children we're working with as they're growing. But I would say the school counselor in the high school is probably someone, and I'm sure you probably have already coordinated with that person, but that would be often the point person that's good to interact with and get their point of view on how to address any issues that might be going on in the school.
Also at the high school level, in addition to the counselors, I would go there first, obviously. I would also go typically, if there is like a special education chairperson that oversees all the process in special ed, that's somebody that you may want to talk to in terms of high school students. They're over all children that are having difficulty, whether they're going through the MTSS process, or they have an IEP, or they have a 504. So that's a key person. If that's not available at your school, typically in a school, administrators like assistant principals are dedicated to specific programs. So you want to find out who that assistant principal is that's dedicated to, for example, MTSS or discipline, and talk to that individual.
And we talked about daily report cards for elementary school age students. When we think about middle school or high school students, we can developmentally adapt those to be more like behavior contracts, because there's too many adults in the high school and middle school oftentimes to keep track of this from class to class to class. But just like Dr. Gallo mentioned, a school dean or assistant principal might know the student pretty well, might hear about if something went wrong. And so that person can often be a point person to set a goal. Like, I don't want to hear any referrals from any of your teachers about disrespectful behavior or being late to class or whatever the target behavior might be. They can communicate with the parent about success on those things. And then the contract can outline what privileges the child or adolescent at this point might have access to if they're successful in meeting those goals. So the same principles can be put in play. They just have to be adapted a little bit to work in an older school setting. Here's a question about motivation. And so I am convinced, I've done this a long time, there is a motivator out there for everybody. We often just have a hard time finding it. And one of the ways you can think about what might, so, and in fact, a lot of times when we're working with kids with ADHD, the motivator is avoiding a task that they dislike, and they will go to great lengths to get out of doing something that requires sustained mental effort. They might spend 3 hours staring at a book rather than the 5 minutes of sitting there, opening the book and doing what it require them to do. And I think part of that is because it may be for some kids literally almost painful to persist with a task because their attention capacity is just not strong. We're asking them to do something that's not one of their strongest suits. And so it's not surprising that they try to avoid it. However, the first person I would ask about what might motivate them is the adolescent themselves.
Correct.
Listen, we got an issue here. I would like to get this done. I would like to not have to argue or struggle about it. It's worth it to me to figure out what it would be worth to you to make this work. And let's have a conversation about that. And then try it.
I'm almost thinking, Dr. Fabiano, for an adolescent, definitely you want to get him involved in the whole DRC development. Let him take control of setting that goal, and working with you, absolutely. But setting that goal, it's he owns it or she owns it.
Well, great. In the interest of everybody's time, we'll probably wind down here. I would say if you scan the QR code and put your name in, someone will contact you back from one of our centers. We'll be happy to answer any additional questions. I can put my email in the chat, and if anybody had anything that they feel was not addressed or any other questions, you can feel free to contact me anytime. I'm happy to follow up. And although I can't provide any direct services or intervention, potentially I can point you in the right direction. Well, thank you everybody for all the time today. I'm going to end the webinar, and we do have one more coming up next week, focused on more combined treatments of medication and positive behavioral supports together. And if you're interested in that or the link to that, feel free to email me and I'll send that to you as well. I hope you all have a good night. Thanks for the terrific questions. Good night.